Today we're going to be looking at main and subordinate clauses. So first of all, I want you to think to yourself, what is a clause? What would make it a subordinate clause? How do you think we might use a subordinate clause? And how are subordinate clauses punctuated? Well, a clause is a group of words which contains a verb. So let's look at these sentences here. Can you identify the verbs in these following sentences? Good. So our first verb was were. Shot, tried, fell. So each of these has its own verb, therefore it is a clause. They all make sense by themselves, so they're called independent or main clauses. And a sentence can be made up of one or more main clause. So we could join together more than one main clause by using a coordinating conjunction. So here we have his legs shot forward and he tried to steady himself, but he fell over. So we have three main clauses linked together with two coordinating conjunctions. A subordinate clause still must contain a verb, however, it won't make sense by itself. It needs the main clause in order for the meaning to be clear. So if we look at these examples here, we can see each of them starts with a subordinating conjunction, because, when, as. They all have their own verbs, was, fell, ripped. However, the meaning is not clear. They don't make sense by themselves, therefore they are a subordinate clause. So a subordinate clause will start with a subordinated conjunction and will not make sense by itself. Again, we can link together more than one subordinate clause. However, it must have a main clause in the sentence. So here we've started with the main clause, Simon felt embarrassed, and we have added two subordinate clauses to that. When he fell over, as he had ripped his trousers, we'd add a full stop onto the end. Now, subordinating conjunctions join subordinate clauses to the main clause, and conjunctions give meaning to the joins, and we can have conjunctions that tell us more about the time, about the place, about the cause, about the condition, or even contrast. Now, when we're identifying subordinate clauses, we need to think, what is the subordinate clause in each sentence? So here we have, Megan shouted at Paul when his shoes got ripped. So the first thing you might want to do is see if you can find where the subordinating conjunction is, which in this case would be when. So this would be the start of the subordinate clause. So the subordinating clause here would be when his shoes got ripped. And the main clause that makes sense by itself is Megan shouted at Paul. Have a little think to yourself. Can you identify the subordinate clause in the next three sentences? Okay, let's look and see how you did. So there we had our main clause. There's our main clause, our main clause. Notice this time the main clause has come second. Now, because the main clause has come second, the subordinating conjunction is now at the start of the sentence as the slope got steeper. So we have nothing to separate the main clause and the subordinate clause. So in this instance, we will need to put a comma. And again, that is repeated for the next one. We've got our subordinate clause first because they were sprinting. So here's our subordinated conjunction. Therefore, we need to separate our main clause with a comma. However, when the main clause came first, we didn't need a comma because our coordinating conjunction separated the two clauses. So just to repeat that, when the subordinate clause goes after the main clause, we don't add commas. Here we have because he saw the huge chasm, it's becoming afterwards, therefore we do not need a comma. But when it goes in the front, we do have to use a comma. So here's our subordinate clause here. When he saw it, our main clauses come second, so we will need a comma to separate those two clauses. Have a go. What do you think would be an appropriate subordinating conjunction to link together these two clauses? Well, we could have had when, the dog was lonely when he was trapped all alone, or we could have had the dog was lonely as he was trapped all alone. Let's look at the second one. We could have had as she looked at them, Megan's friends turned to stone. We could have had if she looked at them, Megan's friends would turn to stone. We could have had when she looked at them. Again, notice our subordinate clauses come first, so we have a comma to separate our subordinate clause from our main clause. Right, have a look at these. Which of the underlined group of words is a subordinate clause? Which one do you think? Well, I'm going to have a little look for the subordinating conjunction to help me decide. And I can see that I've got a subordinating conjunction here as she wanted it to go well. I've got my comma separating it, and then I've got my main clause, she was quite bossy. So this one was the subordinate clause. This time we're going to label the clauses in the sentence as either main or subordinate. Have a read through and decide whether they are main or subordinate clauses. So here we've got the first one. So while Megan distracted the teacher. Well, that doesn't make sense by itself, so that one is going to be a subordinate clause. They sneaked by. Well, that does make sense by itself, so that's going to be a main clause. Because it was the only way to reach the sweets, well, I'm starting with my subordinating conjunction. It doesn't make sense by itself, therefore it is a subordinate clause. Right, let's see what these might look like on our SAT paper. So here we have what kind of clause is underlined in this sentence. So if they could afford to. So we would need to write that it is a subordinate clause because we have started with a subordinating conjunction. On this one here, it says tick one box in each row to show if the underlined clause is a main clause or a subordinate clause. So we need to make sure we followed the instruction. So I've got who was 9 years old. Doesn't make sense by itself, so it's a subordinate clause. So that she could play more often. Doesn't make sense by itself, so it's a subordinate clause. Billy could not play tennis with her friend Lana. Well, that does make sense, so it is a main clause. Here I'm being asked to rewrite the sentence by adding a subordinate clause, and I have to remember to punctuate my answer correctly. So I said the children played on the swings. Now I'm going to choose to start it with the subordinate clause. Now I need to remember that because it's the start of a sentence, I need to put in a clear capital letter. So I'm going to say when it stopped raining. So here's my clear capital letter. So when it stopped raining. Now because my subordinate clauses come first, I'm going to need to remember to put my comma. And then I can add my main clause. So when it stopped raining, the children played on the swings. And I will need to make sure that I give a clear full stop. Now I could have put that sentence the other way around, in which case I would have started with the children played on the swings when it stopped raining. In that case, I wouldn't have needed a comma to separate, but I still would have needed to have made sure that I started with a capital letter and a full stop.